All right, we are going to get started. Welcome, everybody. So, as we officially kick off the webinar, I want to introduce our main speaker today, who is Jerry Clayton. And before we get doing that, a couple of housekeeping items. Folks, you can use the Q&A and the chat feature to send us your thoughts and comments, and we will be monitoring there both throughout today's thought leadership session as well as for an open-ended Q&A session at the end. Without further ado, though, my name is Abigail Tucker, and I'm one of the co-founders of Heroes, but I really do want to focus in because we have a wonderful amount of time here today with Jerry, our guest speaker. So let me introduce Jerry. Jerry Clayton is a 30-year criminal justice professional with operational and executive experience in police service, corrections, special weapons, and tactics. Jerry was previously the elected sheriff of Washtenaw County, Michigan, first elected in 2008 and subsequently re-elected in 2012, 2016, and 2020. He retired in January 2025. Jerry has been a certified criminal justice trainer and instructor for over 25 years, specializing in numerous areas, including cultural diversity, bias-free policing, organizational management, and leadership. He provides training, compliance monitoring, and subject matter expert consulting services to a variety of private and public sector clients, including the United Nations, the United States Department of Justice, and the National Sheriff's Association. We are thrilled to have Jerry with us here today. Sorry about that, Jerry. Apparently, I'm so excited that I've got a frog in my throat. So, Jerry, to kick us off, may I ask the first question? I bet this is an easy one that I'm going to do, but to kick us off, my first question is, what drew you to a career in public safety, and what kept you committed to that career going forward?
Got it. First off, good morning. Thank you so much for the invitation. I really do. I'm excited and I appreciate the opportunity to join you guys here today. I am really excited about this because I'm excited about Heroes and the work that you do, and I think it's so important. And we'll talk about why that is in a minute. What drew me to the work? I don't know. I'm like a lot of people who spent a large part of their career in corrections. Very few of us, at 12 and 13 decided that's what we wanted to do, or we were in college, that's what we went for. Some folks, but very rarely does that happen. Long story short, I was a college athlete at Eastern Michigan. They got me a part-time job at the sheriff's office. I was doing some work program work for them, and it's almost like hopefully nobody gets offended by this, but I use this a lot. It's a Godfather quote, right? It's like being in the mafia. Just when you think you're out, they pull you back in. Well, corrections held me in. And the reason why I stayed, and I tell this story, this story is really, really quick. I'm a kid born in the South. I was born in Bessemer, Alabama. But I grew up a large part in New York. Well, at any rate, my grandparents was a big influence on me, especially my grandfather. Um, he was an activist. He was a hard worker. He was a guy that taught me about what's called sundown towns. He was a carpenter, and he would get up in the morning, and my grandmother would fix his breakfast, and he'd be out on the road by about 5:30, 6 o'clock. When I got old enough to join him and talk to him, I asked him why he got back so early, and he told me, he says, I got early because I got to get a good start because I have to be back in my neighborhood before the sun goes down, or I might not make it back. And over time, I realized that a lot of that was obviously because of racism and bias. And I came to learn that, society has used the profession, police, corrections, criminal justice, oftentimes as a tool to impact the less fortunate, people of color and things of that nature. When I got in the profession, I decided that if I was going to stay, my commitment was to try to lead in a way that eliminated the kinds of actions and decisions and poor leadership and the kind of culture in these organizations that had detrimental impact on everyone, but especially people of color, marginalized folks. So again, people sometimes when they hear that you're focused about people that look like me, people of color, marginalized folks, they think it's an either or proposition. That if you're advocating for them, you can't be advocating for the majority, and nothing could be farthest from the truth. right? We don't talk about leadership and values and all those things. I think everybody should be treated with dignity and respect, even those that have made mistakes and those that we have identified as being perpetrators in society. We still treat them a certain way because that says a lot about us. So it was a long-winded way of saying that's how I got here. The reason why I stayed for as long as I did, almost 40 years, is because I think everybody has an opportunity to make that difference.
I love that. Thank you so much. Um, Folks, I'm sharing the results of who we've got in the room so far. We had about 80% participation in this poll, so it does look like the majority of our folks who've joined us this morning have between 6 and 15 years in this profession that we're here to talk about. It also appears that we're kind of split on our attendees between sergeants, supervisors, middle management, lieutenants, captains, and commanders. We've also got a lot of correctional jail staff here, which we really appreciate because we know that those are our future leaders. So thank you so much all for being here today. Jerry, just in follow up to that, when we were out training in California, CDCR, I know we have a lot of folks today from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. We started there in 2023, and we heard a lot about the shifting in language to incarcerated persons. And it was a real conversation around, certainly I can appreciate, I'm sure you can, Jerry, you're in this field long enough, words and language changes, and it does sometimes feel like you got to keep up. But this was one that it was really amazing to get into some thought conversations around why that was meaningful. And you touched on it just right there, right? We're treating everybody with dignity and respect, including those that we're responsible for their care and custody. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I mean you're spot on, right? We say words matter, how we define things matter. And you know, the backlash has been, oh, everybody's woke and all that stuff. This is not about being woke. This is really just about acknowledging each other's humanity. There's nothing far left or far right about that. It's the human, it's how we should think as leaders, especially in this profession. I think we'll talk a little bit more, but what we're charged with, how we can impact people's lives is so important. If others don't pay attention, that we pay attention to how we do these things.
So true. So true. Yep. I love the focus on humanity. I think it's Nelson Mandela who said that you can judge a lot about a society by how they run their prisons or jails. So it's well stated for that. Well, let me jump right in. You're kind of touching on this. My next question that comes to mind is, looking back on your career, what leadership qualities do you think are essential for running a successful and resilient jail operation, prison operation? I mean, we're talking about a lot of similar trends, but what are the leadership qualities that are successful for running those?
I think it's a good question, and we talk about words and we talk about how we define. I'll think about it. I want to actually talk about this from the perspective of competencies, right? Competencies in the sense that, and I think the reason we should talk about it from competencies because these are learned. I mean, we can learn and develop and build strength and muscle in these competencies. We oftentimes talk about our effective leaders made or are they born? And it's our joke is both, right? Everybody's born, but effective leaders are made. Some people have some of these what we call natural qualities or all this stuff. But let's think about the competencies because we need to think about when we develop and invest in staff, we should be investing to build their competencies in these areas. So I'll start off with strategic thinking. And one of the reasons why I talk about that is because when we think about strategic leaders, part of that strategy is having a clear vision, being able to articulate to your staff, this is who we are, why we exist, what our purpose is. And so when we have that vision, we can anticipate future trends, we make informed decisions, we analyze complex situations, and develop long-term plans and solutions that reinforce what our values are, that get us closer to our mission. So not just thinking, and here's where I'll say between strategic to some degree in a simple way and non-strategic. Think about it from a shift supervisor standpoint. They have a situation that they have to manage right there in the immediacy. They manage it. You can manage it one or two ways. I can manage it for the moment, or I can manage it for the moment and also prepare for the future because I'm going beyond just my shift. I'm going beyond just the day. I think about the organization. I think about why we do what we do. So I think strategic thinking is really important. Decision making is the same thing, making sound decisions, right? Well-informed decisions. And here's the key, I think that from a leadership standpoint that contributes to a resilient jail is sometimes you have to make decisions right away. So I get that. So you make those decisions right away, and oftentimes with limited information. So you don't have all the information. So when you make those decisions, we should tell our staff all the time, you can't have a policy for everything. So you have to make decisions based on a little bit of your experience, what you know, and the values, and what kind of outcomes are you trying to achieve. And we also know this, strong and good decision making, strategic thinking does not mean you're not going to make mistakes. So we're going to make mistakes. We're going to be a learning organization, and we're going to develop from that. And I'll add a couple more. Team building. So the leader's ability to create and develop high performing teams. Those things don't happen by accident, right? It's the vision of the leader, the value of the leader and the leadership team, how we communicate with each other. We can add communication to that as well, right? As being a competency that's really key. But that team building is about motivating each other, fostering collaboration, and creating this productive work environment. And I remember when I first started back in the 80s, you never thought about a productive, healthy work environment in corrections. I know we didn't. We can talk about the difference a little bit later. But now we should be striving for that and building that team. And the last one I'll say, there's more, but the last one I think is probably the most important is this whole concept of emotional intelligence, right? So understanding and managing our own emotions and then recognizing and influencing the emotions of others. Because, I used to believe way back when that I could make decisions void of emotion. And I learned over time that that's impossible. It's just not humanly possible. We whether we know it or not, we often have an emotional reaction before we have a fact-based reaction, right? And that emotional reaction sometimes can influence what we do, even in face of facts that push us the other way. And I think, so those things, I think leaders, not just a leader, but your team of leaders that embody a lot of these competencies. And we'll talk a little bit more about values. And you combine that with a strong set of values, you really are moving toward a resilient jail.
I absolutely love this. We're getting a lot of positive feedback for what you're saying. And I think there's a couple of things I want to touch on just based on some of the comments that we're seeing come through, which is first, it's always great when you attend a webinar event and you walk away with some actionable things and you have just dropped that, right? Hey, if you don't know what EIQ is, go find out. You want to build that competency, it's going to build all these other competencies that we hear you talking about, right? Strategic thinking, clear vision, effective decision making, team building. I really do appreciate that. And of course, one of the other things that I love that you talked about is how, hey, we know that sometimes you have to make an in the moment decision. And every time that happens, you have an opportunity to manage the moment or manage the moment and the future differently. I love that challenge. And we, of course, at Heroes, we love really thinking about how do we exercise our skills as active bystanders. So that value is something that comes through in your routine decision making. But your call out, I think about, I'm going to ask you an off-cuff question here, Jerry, but I'm going to bet you're one of those leaders that really sets intentions and values when you're approaching a workday, an important meeting, because that sounds like something that grounds you for the work you want to do.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I hope and try to model that in our organization. And I'll say it to you this way, leaders and leadership teams with clear vision, not only where they want to lead the organization, but also what their values are, what they believe in, all those things. When those things are clear, right? When there's a sense of certainty that the leaders have, but there's also a sense of certainty that the organization has, right? And we know that nothing paralyzes an organization or paralyzes people more than this sense of uncertainty. I believe it's leadership responsibility is to give enough certainty to the organization about who we are, what we believe in, what our purpose is, all of those things. And I think about that every day. What message do we bring today, or how do we address things today to reinforce that? And I'll say this, so people talk about, and I've often been asked this, uh, you know, you, these decisions that you've had to make and we've had to make seem really, really difficult. My response is always, they've been challenging, but they're not really difficult because we're pretty clear on what our values are. So if you're pretty clear on what your values are and what your intent is and your focus, then Difficult decisions really are just challenging. They're not that hard. We can get through that. And we're not afraid of making a mistake. And we're not afraid of people disagreeing with us because they're principle based, which means we can have a discussion about it moving forward.
I like that. Yeah, that what I hear you saying is that when we know what our values are, decisions are no longer complicated. They might still be hard, but they're no longer complicated, right? Appreciate that. Well, you hinted at this earlier where you said, back in the 80s, it was like this. So my next question to you is over the years, in fact, I was going to say how have, but I actually now know, I know you have seen things change in jails and corrections and things evolve, but particularly regarding staff morale, the management of incarcerated persons, and rehabilitation efforts. You don't have to tackle all three of those unless you want to, but I'm curious, thinking either about staff morale, the management of incarcerated persons, or rehabilitation, what's been one or two of the evolutions that was unexpected but is now very welcomed, or that you've really been a part of and appreciated?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll start off by saying this. When I started back in the mid 80s, I remember people would ask me what I do for a living. This is when I was a CO. So I spent a couple years working, doing work program stuff out in the community while I was finishing school. And then, I decided I'm going to stay here for a minute. Many of us in corrections had that story. I'm only going to do this for a year or two. And then 15 years later, you're like, holy cow, I'm still here. But back then, people would ask me what I do. I said, look, I guard people. I tell grown men when to get up, when to go to bed. I give them toilet paper and I tell them what to do. That's what I do. And then and when we think about traditional corrections, and we thought about safety and security being achieved by how strong are the bars, how well made are the cells, all of that stuff, everything, right? Uh, all the things that you do that is still important. But when I started, that was the key to safety and security. It was the apparatus, it was the infrastructure. The evolution now is a recognition that all those things are important. How you build the jail, the concrete and the steel, all that's important. But the most important thing is we achieve safety and security. We manage life, health, and safety in a correctional setting by effectively managing the behavior of the incarcerated population. That's how we do, right? I mean, think about it. I remember way back when we'd go in. I remember telling guys, "Oh, you will lock up. We'll lock you up because if you wait long enough, I'm gonna get enough people, and we're gonna go in there. And we're gonna take care of what we need." I remember that. I remember coming in where there was what we used to call available officers call every day. There's fights. We're going all over the place every day. They're fighting each other with, and we thought that was just a normal way of doing business. I remember walking in and the jail would smell, or it was atrocious and it was dirty and it was dingy. And what I've seen now in the evolution is you walk into a lot of jails, not all of them, but you walk into a lot of them. They are sometimes the cleanest facility in a county. They are safe. They smell good. Listen, you still have people that are in jail that have made mistakes that are some are just bad people. They're being held accountable. But at the end of the day, they're human beings there and how we address them. So the evolution has been safety and security through effectively managing the incarcerated population. And also the evolution is the most important element of that are the correction officers. It's the people, right? You can't effectively manage the incarcerated population by just barking out orders and thinking everybody's going to jump. It's about setting expectations, holding people accountable for those expectations, acknowledging when they meet those expectations, making sure that they have the resources necessary to meet those expectations, making sure that we meet their basic needs, right? Think about it. When I think about problem behavior in a jail, oftentimes, if we're being honest, we got to look in the mirror first. Am I working to meet the basic needs of, of heat, coolness, food, all those things? Because if we're not doing it, they're going to do it for themselves, just like any of us would do given those same circumstances. So it is this recognition, and it's not this whole thing about, well, we're not holding people accountable. We think about holding people accountable by still holding on to their dignity. And we also think about holding ourselves accountable. So I think is that, and the last piece of that, and I know it's sort of long-winded, but the last piece of that is we start to understand now that to effectively manage people's behavior, I have to be effective in terms of influencing people, right? And influencing people and impacting them is really a cornerstone of leadership, right? All the things that we just talked about, how do I make decisions? How do I communicate? How do I think about things? My emotional intelligence. I can't effectively manage the population if I can't manage my own emotions. So we start to see that shifting, and we start to see more of an investment in staff in what some call soft skills, but I call essential skills: communications, de-escalation, emotional intelligence, not getting emotionally hijacked, critical thinking in the moment, long-term thinking and planning. All those things come into play.
I love that. Yeah. And I like the reframe of those aren't just the soft skills, they're the necessary skills, 100%. And I think that, what a great example of, of yeah, that we use a word, a semantic, to describe something, and it actually unintentionally sends a different message. So for sure. I know we're going to get into here. So what are the challenges? We've kind of talked about what are the essential leadership qualities? What are the evolution and changes? We're getting into challenges. So I did post a poll for folks to rank what their thoughts are. And, for folks who are seeing it, it's ranking what you think are the biggest challenges in corrections today: recruitment, job stressors. And job stressors, you just mentioned a few, Jerry, right? Sometimes you getting into an altercation with an incarcerated person versus an organizational stress is the effective leadership that we're talking about, right? And are you working with those people with emotional IQ, shift work, and lack of training? Or I would even potentially rephrase that as, poor training. So we're getting some results so far. We've got about 50% of people have already responded to that. Appreciate it. Also, as a reminder, folks, when you're done with the poll, feel free to drop in questions into the Q&A feature and to panelists. We want to hear from you, and we would love to make sure that you're having an opportunity to ask Jerry, our leader today, about his thoughts on effective leadership in corrections. One of the things that I really appreciate about what you talked there is that shift over time. I was talking to another formerly retired sheriff who had a very similar experience of like, man, this is how I started my career. And I was really remarking on how, that humility is one of those emotionally intelligent skills that we want to hone in. And I think that's so true because things do evolve, right? And none of us want to be judged about how we started our career, right? And so how do we stay humble that we can learn new things, right? That whether it is learning effective leadership skills like you're talking about, active bystandership skills, one of our passions, that it doesn't mean that you are a bad person if you didn't have those 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. It means the industry has evolved, and please join us in moving forward. So really, really like that. We've got about 70. Oh, go ahead, please.
That's great. No, I was just agreeing. I was like, that's just so on point.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm going to share the results. So it looks like, boy, we've got a lot of mixes here. So I will offer that if we had a leader, it certainly would say that probably a significant challenge appears to be recruitment. That appear is our number one. And I think, I don't know how folks answered that, but I observe is that is both retention and recruitment, right? It's that both and for sure. And then right behind that, let's see, what is our one, right? Is organizational stress, right? So we're getting on that, those leaders, the policies that we make, how are we building that? So that I think is huge for us to understand. Appreciate that. And all of these are important, right? We every single one of these are important, and people appreciate it. So I think people appreciate one of the things that I was talking to one of our agency leaders at Anne Arundel County, which is a county jail in Maryland, doing some knockout innovative work, including adopting here as active bystandership. But they were talking about that the general public, when they hear what they do, their response is, "Oh, that must be a hard job." And he said, depending on the audience, I may or may not share that actually my biggest challenges at work are not always what they think it is, because my biggest challenges are often some of those other organizational recruitment training that probably applies in lots of industries, not just corrections. But let me ask you, Jerry, what are your thoughts, especially right now, where you're at in your career, and I know you do a lot of consulting. What are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges in the correctional workforce?
Yeah, I think it is recruitment, and we'll talk about recruitment and retention. I think they go hand in hand. And then we'll circle back to organizational culture, because I think organizational culture has a big impact on your recruitment, but especially your retention. So we just go to recruitment first. I mean, if you had I remember when I took office in January of '09, if people had asked me towards the end of my career as sheriff, what would the biggest challenge be? It would not have been staffing. It just wouldn't have been staffing. I mean, it just never we were never in that space. But over time, I mean, when you combine everything, especially the post George Floyd era and the reform movement that happened in that regard, and then COVID, those two things came and it just shifted a lot of our landscape. And so now people have always had options about how they can what they work on. Now they have even more options. At one point, from an economy standpoint, there were jobs galore, and there were jobs that were paying just as much as you could as a CO, right? With and not doing shift work. So I think all of those things. Um, I think compensation matters in terms of bringing people into the organization. I think life work balance matters. And notice I said life work and not work life. Changing, because words do matter. It's life and work. I've always loved my job, but I work to make sure that I and my family could live the kind of life we want to live. So that balance matters. But you know what also matters? Purpose matters. The purpose of why you go and work every day, it matters. And remember, I said when I started, we were thought of in the corrections space as guards or jailers. And now we talk about this whole concept of professional correction officers, right? That there's a profession there and it's a skill there, and you are a key component of the criminal justice system. I tell people all the time, especially for sheriffs, sheriffs are sleeping at the wheel if they don't really embrace their corrections operation and invest in them and invest in the people. Because although your deputies, if you're full service, do a great job, dispatch does a great job, the staff that run the jail have the biggest potential to impact folks that are going back into our community than anybody, how they interact. So recruiting quality people, which now brings me to retention. And I remember I've been in a number of these sessions with other um, professionals, and we're having this recognition that maybe we don't have a recruitment problem. Maybe what we have is a retention problem. So I even think back in the organization before I left, if we had retained all the people that we had hired the last 3 or 4 years of my tenure, we'd have been in really good shape. We'd have done about 85, 90%, which is high in most organizations in terms of staffing. But we would get people and maybe it's not the right fit, all the other things. So we had to be really intentional around the organizational culture. So this recruitment, this retention, and let's go organizational stressors. And this is going to be my shout out and my handout to our mid-level supervisors. Because when I go to different organizations and we do surveys, and even in my experience, the bosses are important, who the sheriff is, director, and all that stuff. They are really important. But there's no person more important, I think, or critical to the experience of staff in the workplace than their mid-level supervisor and mid-level leader. Day to day, do they embody the right values? Are they contributing to developing the kind of organizational culture that creates a healthy climate and a healthy work environment where we have purpose, where I'm going to stay? People that stayed with us didn't stay because they made more. They stayed because they wanted to be a part of this. And they may hear from me every now and then as a sheriff, but they heard from their mid-level supervisor every day. So I want to put this plug in. We must invest in the development of our mid-level folks beyond just basic supervision training. What we're trying to build is what we call ambidextrous leaders. So an ambidextrous leader is this person who can manage tasks. They can manage that shift. They get the booking done. They make sure classification's running, all that stuff. They manage well, but they also lead well. They lead people, right? They create opportunities to give feedback and coach and support and all this. They hold folks accountable. When a staff member makes a mistake, it's not the end of the world. It's a learning opportunity. So that mid-level person, and I'll end with this piece, that kind of leadership, those skill sets don't happen by accident. Organizations have to invest in the professional development of all their staff, but in that mid-level, you have to invest in their leadership capabilities. And it is a leader's responsibility when we talk about employee wellness to invest in professional development, because I believe investment in professional development, giving people opportunities to grow, is a part of employee wellness.
I love that. Absolutely. And I mean, as you know, one of our three pillars in Heroes is reducing mistakes, preventing misconduct, and promoting health and wellness. And you just hit such a helpful point, because we are often clarifying for folks that while we do not offer traditional health and wellness resources, there are great companies out there that do so. Our role with active bystandership training is that you unlock the potential of those being more utilized across your system by empowering everybody in your workforce to say, hey, I'm worried about you. How about we get you connected to services? But you just tapped on another example of that. When you invest in leaders and you invest in the leadership development and the professional development of your staff overall, that's a wellness benefit, 100%. And I also hear really strongly from you that when we invest in that mid-level management, your sergeants, your shift supervisors, your clinical supervisors, right? I think about your classification supervisors, those mid-level management folks, that is where you're going to see the most bang for your buck in that retention goal that we're after, which that has a direct circle on recruitment. Did I get that right, Jerry?
No, I mean you nailed it. And it's so, and this is the hardest part. It's so interesting. I've said to you before, that I said before, part of my experience is I was fortunate enough to be on some of these different consent decree teams, right? These agencies that got in trouble and the feds had to go in and blah blah blah. And we spent our time focusing on the policy and having the right training in place and the right technology, and we're checking these boxes, right? And I remember being on some teams, I wasn't on for that long, but some under consent decrees for 10, 12 years. And the boxes are getting checked and they're spending millions of dollars. But guess what? The experience of the staff and the experience of the people that they were interacting with didn't change. And the reason why it didn't change, because they never changed the organizational culture. They were tinkering around with everything else. And what we don't understand is the policy is important, the training is important, all of it is. But if you don't have the organizational culture that supports these initiatives, you're not going to get the sustained change that you say you want, right? It's just not going to happen. And it is your mid-level folks that are going to be more likely to carry that torch. They have to be a part of it. So I'll just give you one quick example. So say we decide we're going to invest in an employee wellness program, but organizationally, we don't reinforce the value of employee wellness and what that looks like and all the other things. This is why I know you're going to get to this question. So I'm just going to foreshadow it. This whole thing around heroes and able and all this, why this is so important. It's because there is no wellness program, I don't care, that anybody's ever developed that's going to have the impact if the organizational culture doesn't support it. So if the organizational culture doesn't support it, if it's not a value, it's not part of the beliefs, and it doesn't influence, you'll have a shift sergeant that says, yeah, I'm not sending you to this employee wellness program, this soft thing because I believe X. It short circuits your initiative. I think programs like ABLE, programs like HERO, especially in corrections, because I think it gets ignored too often, is one of these foundational components that starts to redefine what it means to care for each other, redefines what it means to support each other. It redefines what it means to be accountable. Accountability doesn't have to mean harsh punishment all the time, right? And it redefines what intervention is. And I'll end with this piece. And here's what I love about it so much. It reify. Listen, I always believe that thin blue line, I got your back, got hijacked. It got hijacked, and it got to this point where what that means is I never talk to me. I don't tell anybody anything. I'm not going to hurt your feelings. But when I see one of my colleagues going down a path that is going to cause him or her harm or someone else's harm, when I don't intervene, I'm not protecting them, I'm protecting me. I don't intervene because it's too hard, it's too difficult. They might not react to it. I know I'm going ahead of time things, but it just all ties in for me. So changing the mindset to here's what this means to really care for someone that you say you care for. Your willingness to move in that direction. And I'm going to tie this back to this whole supervisors thing and this professional development. When you invest in your especially your mid-level, your watch commanders and folks like that, they reinforce those concepts on a continual basis to staff. And that's where you start to get the sustainability that we want in programs like Heroes.
Well stated. I really powerful what you said there, where when we when we see harm occurring and we do not intervene, we're not protecting them with our blind loyalty. We're actually only thing we're protecting in ourselves is perhaps our ego or our feelings, right? We're protecting ourselves from that discomfort. I think that's what you were getting at. Yeah. Because we're actually not protecting ourselves from potentially being audited.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. No, it's only I'm only protecting myself from the uncomfortable experience that I fear because we just don't do that. That is this, and this is real because throughout the entire time, my entire career, there have been a number of people that we have lost. And in hindsight, I've been in those meetings, in those conversations where folks would say, "Yeah, I saw that, and I knew that." That's people that love them, that love that person that we lost immensely, only to find out that we were really protecting ourselves from that discomfort when we did not intervene when they were doing something that we knew was very harmful.
Yeah, really bringing it home to the value, right? We love the people that we work with. We don't want to lose them, and it's an unacceptably high rate of death by suicide in corrections. It's also an unacceptably high rate of people who make it all the way to retirement only to enjoy a very brief amount of that life in that life work balance you talked about, right? Absolutely. So I couldn't agree more. And I'm thinking about, talking about that heart through leadership and connection. Myself and some of the other Heroes National instructors had the honor to visit many of our CDCR facilities. I know we have a lot of CDCR folks on the call today, and I'm thinking about some conversations that I had with wardens where I was, complimenting them. Hey, I saw great training today, great job. And you can tell the warden who instantly responds back, that's just a reflection of the training sergeants, the training lieutenants, the staff there. They see that they're trying to create that culture in their mid-level supervisors, but they're immediately modeling that their ego is not the primary driver there, right? They want to build that culture of workplace wellness that you talked about, which is organizational culture, 100% for sure. I do just want to give a quick comment for what we're seeing in the chat. Irving, it's great to have you on. I'm glad that you are listening and able to follow through with closed captions. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Irvin Staub is a world-renowned researcher in the field of active bystandership and is quite frankly the reason that ABLE and Heroes exists. His research and his advocacy for how active bystandership can truly prevent harm. We're thrilled to have you on our advisory board and have you with us today. And Jerry, something you may not know is a couple of weeks ago, we were connecting in with our advisory board to include Dr. Irvin Staub. And one of his questions to us was, I'd really like to know how this is making a difference. And I just want to offer for folks, especially our CDCR in Anne Arundel County and our other agencies who are on the call today, feel free to share into the chat feature or in the question and answer. Many of you have shared with me how active bystandership has helped you in work and at home. And if you feel comfortable sharing your heroes examples, your moments of active bystandership, I think we would love to hear that and celebrate that. And if you want to just put it in the chat, you're welcome to, or you can let me know in the chat or on Q&A if you'd like to speak, and I can unmute you. We'd love to hear your voice as well. But to that point, you mentioned an example of intervening on a peer whose health and wellness is clearly declining, right? And I think, and just as a side note, for those of you who haven't already observed, Jerry and I thought about this idea months ago and we couldn't stop ourselves from talking about it. So we put together some structured questions because we knew if not, we can get really excited and jam out on correctional leadership. But I can't say enough that your questions are what we really want to hear. So if you've got questions or feedback, we would love to be interrupted with them. Cecilia, great to hear from you from SAC. Glad that you're with us today. So, but getting back to that one question that you were leading to, we know that programs like ABLE, Active Bystandership in Law Enforcement, are gaining traction. We're applying these principles with heroes and corrections staff. And I think, you hinted at this, and I'm just curious if you would add anything else to why it's important to foster a culture where staff intervention is alive and well. Like, why is that important for the correctional values in the work that we had to build a culture of active bystandership?
So I think it goes with how the profession has evolved. So if we go from what I said before, the traditional, what we have known as traditional approach to corrections, and how safety and security is the overriding factor, and it's achieved through the physical architecture and those things. And again, don't mishear me; those things are still important, but there's the recognition that safety and security is really achieved when we pay attention to life, health, safety. We appropriately manage the incarcerated population, all those things and everything that goes into that. When we think about organizational culture, we think about the formula. And I think about the formula, the cultural formula is our basic, assumptions and our beliefs is what influences our values. And it really is our values that really influence how we behave. So my point again is I could write a policy that says this, but if the organizational values reinforce something else, people are going to behave according to those organizational values. Now, they might try to adhere to the policy, especially when people are watching. But when they aren't, it's the organizational culture that's going to really influence those individuals. So think about that. And leaders need to understand, or we should continue to understand, our important role in cultivating the organizational culture and the fact that it's not a one-time thing. It's not all of a sudden we change something and we say the culture of organization has changed, we're good to go. Organizational culture is not static. The influences that pushes back against what you're trying to accomplish is not static. It's this continual thing. Heroes, I believe, is another foundational element, as I said before, that has a set of basic assumptions and beliefs that reinforce the importance of how we care for each other, what that looks like. It also reinforces for leaders that want to create a learning environment or a learning organization. Think about this. When I intervene not just to stop you from doing something that's going to cause harm for you. I have opportunity to intervene, you stop. There's also the opportunity for us to coach, to learn, to mentor, to grow, to adjust, and that just builds into the organization. So for a leader that says, look, I want to lead a correctional facility that believes in a couple things, that is life, health, and safety is our most important thing, that we maintain safety and security, that our staff is the most important component of everything that we do, that we must care for our staff. And one of the ways to care for our staff is to keep them from doing harm to themselves and others. That it is not just the leader's responsibility to do that, the formal leaders, it's everybody's responsibility to do that. Kouzes and Posner in their leadership challenge, one of their tenets is leadership is everybody's responsibility. And if we believe that, so is intervention. Intervening is everybody's responsibility. And going down that path, I think is really, really important. And here's the other piece, and I'll pause after this part. Here's the other part that really struck me. Two things that struck me. It also teaches us how to teach others how to intervene with us. So now I'm teaching you the language. You and I are partners. And I say to you, I say, look, Abigail, you and I are working together. We're working this housing unit together. Listen, let me teach you how to intervene. Here's what I don't need you to do. When I'm in the middle of something you think I'm going sideways, to just rush into it and blah, blah, blah. What I need you to do is, here's the code word. Whatever the code word, maybe the tap on the shoulder, whatever it is, I'm going to teach you how to intervene. Imagine having those conversations. Imagine if car partners or housing unit partners, anyway, had those kind of conversations, the things that we could just stop from happening that causes the organization to have some problems. So I think that's those things are really, really important in terms of creating the right kind of culture in an organization.
I love that. Yeah, I put a little kind of tickler in the chat for people who are attending is that you modeled some skills direct from our curriculum, which is, how do you create a permission right up front? That's one of Liza's really big ones. And then you really talked about being specific, right? Specifically, and I love the code word, right? That's it's a form of distraction, but it's also a way that we give people options. So we did have a question come through in the chat, so I want to just share it here and get your thoughts. But the question for you that came across from one of our attendees is, what do you see as the most immediate skill development opportunity for correctional leaders in equipping them to build healthy cultures?
Emotional intelligence.
Love it.
I think it is by far, there's always this discussion. I know you guys had this discussion, what's more important, EQ or IQ? They're both important, but the research continues to show that people with high EQ, that have evolved EQ, tend to have, especially from a leadership standpoint, the more of that impact, right? So they sense emotions, they sense their own, they sense others, they sense a responsibility. This is so important to me. I remember we were teaching a course, I mean, just really, really quick, of first-term sheriffs. And what we do is we do assessment. So we did an emotional intelligence assessment. We went through it, we debriefed. And one of the sheriffs, especially as we talked about the social aspect of it, right? Being keen into someone else's emotions and influencing them and de-escalating them. The sheriff, she said to me, she says, "Yeah, I understand. I can read other people's emotions. I just never saw it as my responsibility to de-escalate." So she could tell, but she's like, "That's not my response. I'm not responsible for your emotional state." And then we just started talking through. So if you have the ability to talk someone down, why wouldn't you take that? That's a leadership. So learning those type of things. So I think it's that. I think understanding, doing an assessment of your emotional intelligence, and then creating a plan for how over time you build strength in those areas. Your self-awareness, social awareness, those things are so important, right? Your ability to monitor and manage yourself, your ability to influence others. I think that's the key. Because in the correctional environment, those that have run shifts and working right, this stuff comes fast and furious, right? And it's always going, and there's always the opportunity for someone to sort of go off the rails from an emotional standpoint and not be able to walk this back. And there's research that shows when your staff has those negative interactions, especially emotional, there's that cortisol dump, and what hits you from that neuroscience standpoint, from that physiological standpoint, how effective now can I be over the next 4 or 5 hours after I've had this tense interaction? I'm limiting my effectiveness, my ability to engage. And unlike a police officer, and this is not a slight against police officers, been there, done that, that's in their car, might have a bad interaction and can choose whether they're going to interact for the next couple hours. In corrections, as you know, we don't get that chance. If you're running a housing unit, you're managing a housing unit, you're there. So how you manage that, and every time you get emotionally hijacked, how many hours does it take for you to calm down? And in doing all that, how ineffective are you in terms of impacting other people's behavior? All those things go together.
Brilliant. And I just want to, you probably saw my nonverbal light up really at that last reference. In Heroes, we have a lot of our national instructors were previously law enforcement officers. We have many correctional folks, and it is fascinating to watch our folks with law enforcement experience spend time with our clients who work in corrections and say, whoa, that's a hard job. Yeah, absolutely, right? Because we know that self-regulating is easier said than done. So I loved your phrase. We get emotionally hijacked and it takes time. And I also really want to highlight something you stated. You didn't say if or when. You said however many times in a day we get emotionally hijacked because we're working in an environment in corrections where that is prevalent any shift practically, right? And how we're regulating to that. So I love this immediate takeaway, which is it's emotional intelligence, but one very immediate takeaway is how are you self-regulating when you've been emotionally hijacked? Is it your heart rate? Is it how fast you're talking? Can you elicit your peers to give you feedback, trusted peers in an active bystandership culture to say, hey, I'm working on noticing when I'm emotionally hijacked because I can't do anything about it if I don't notice it. And that would be a great way to do that. So learning how to self-regulate gives us the opportunity to show up differently as leaders, as active bystanders, and mostly because we want everybody to go home, right? And we want you to go home healthy.
Hey, and I'll just add, I mean, the active intervention part is so important because, when we're if we have built the kind of muscle that we desire, the likelihood of it being emotionally hijacked is minimized, but it's going to happen. And or it's more likely to happen. When it happens, when I see, I'm like, holy cow, Abigail's getting emotionally hijacked. How can I intervene? Just maybe I can say something, maybe I reposition myself so we see each other and she sort of gets it. So if but that never happens unless we're having that conversation. It
Right.
never happens unless we're intentional about it. And quite frankly, it never happens unless the leadership in the organization says, this is what we believe, this is important to us, this is what this looks like, and we're investing 100%. And I was something else I was going to add. I just want to add this real quick. And we tried to we gave examples. In our organization, we would talk to staff maybe about a new policy or something that we were changing. I'll give two examples really quick, and these are on the police side. We rewrote our pursuit policy, dialed it back quite a bit. We rewrote our foot pursuit policy, dialed it back quite a bit. And even when staff were pushing back, our response was, this is administrative aid, or this is administrative intervention. This
Mm.
is our way of intervening ahead of time when we try to eliminate times where you are in situations that cause you to have issues, right? So I think there is the opportunity to talk about this administrative intervention in a way. It's not just a policy. We're intervening for these reasons because this is for your welfare as a staff and for the population.
Yeah, I love it. On that note, folks, I love it. We're going to end on intervention is to for your welfare because we care about every single one of you. We want you to have a healthy career. And I love the reframe life work balance, not work life balance. I might steal that one, Jerry. That was fantastic. Folks, we know that you have busy days, and we are so grateful that you spent time this Monday morning to learn about some thought leadership from Jerry Clayton. We'll be posting information about this on our website later on this week. And with that, we're going to conclude the webinar today. If anybody has any questions, feel free to toss them in. And if not, we wish you health and safety. And thank you all so much. Jerry, thank you for lending us your time and expertise.
Thank you for inviting me. I had a good time. Thanks.
Take care, all. Absolutely. We are seeing some questions come in. Oh, I like this. Thanks, Mark from CDCR. And you're right, holding people accountable. How do we elevate from a disciplinary approach to something that maybe is more EIQ? Jerry, feel free to comment if you want. I love that question. How do you hold leadership and administration more accountable to improve their leadership, right? Because yeah, we are all leaders on that. I will say that I do think that emotional intelligence is a big factor of that, learning how to regulate on these pieces.
Yeah, I agree. I missed the first part of that. The hope is that leaders see what their role is and they they're willing to invest and to move beyond. And then the ultimate leader is willing to invest in their other staff. So I remember at our place, we invested for almost 8 years in professional development for our staff because we knew that was the only way we were going to create the kind of culture in our organization that we desired, is to invest and help them develop. And now they're our leaders now that we've all gotten old and left.
That's right. As we talked about the change in corrections for sure. So I know you can, there's some thank yous directly in the chat, but a lot of thank yous directly to that question and others. So I think on that note, we will end on a moment of gratitude, wishing everybody a great day. And again, Jerry, thank you so much for your time.